Welcome to Know This Live. I'm Zincle Asamoah. This week, Illinois became the first state in the country to eliminate cash bail for jail release when someone is waiting for their case to be heard. The practice has been called a poor people's tax by critics and has left some people who are unable to afford bail detained for weeks as they await trial. The practice also disproportionately affects people of color. Joining me today is Illinois Justice Project Director Sherrone Mitchell Jr. Sherrone works on criminal justice reform and has advocated for bringing an end to cash bail. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Of course, and I want to jump in first. Can you just explain for us, sort of in plain terms, what this bill that Governor J.B. Pritzker signed does in practice?
Yeah, let me try to do it in plain terms. Sometimes it's tough for us lawyers to do it, but I will give it my best try. When a person goes before a judge, when a person is arrested, they go before a judge, and the judge needs to make a decision about what will happen to them during the pendency of their case. Judges now have basically three options. A judge can decide to release that person. The case still goes on. They're still responsible for bringing themselves back to court. And if found guilty, they could face whatever penalties are allowed under the statute. That's option number one. Option number two, a judge could hold someone, basically saying that the person will be detained until the outcome of the case. And option number three is a cash bond, which is kind of a mesh of the two. It's basically saying that the person is eligible for release, but that person will not be released until they're able to pay a certain money amount. So what the bill does is that it does kind of three things. It ends that first practice, that third practice. It ends the use of cash bond. Money will no longer be the main determining factor in whether somebody will be in or out of jail, but it also reforms the decision-making process so that courts can more clearly make decisions about who should be in and who should be out. It also addresses some data collection so that we know in our 102 counties what's going on when it comes to pretrial, and address some of the issues around pretrial policy, including electronic monitoring, pretrial risk assessments, and warrants.
And I think in my conversations about ending cash bail, there can be confusion. So does this mean anyone arrested for a crime will essentially be able to walk free regardless of the crime committed until their case is heard?
I think it's best to think about this policy as how we make decisions. So currently in the status quo, we allow money to make decisions about who should be in or who should be out. So a person can be accused of a crime, they can go before a judge, and the judge says, hey, you need to pay X amount of dollars and you'll be released. What we're saying with this policy is money shouldn't be the main factor. So we're giving it to the judges to make the decision about who should be in and who should be out. And we're creating a whole legal structure that allows for better decision making. I think too often people think about this as just kind of like a release, just about release that everybody will be released. I think we believe that there will be more folks that will be released, but we also feel like we'll make better decisions about who should be and who shouldn't be. The current situation allows money to make that decision, and I think the consensus is that that's a bad way of determining incarceration.
And it would be helpful to hear some examples. I know that prior to being a part of the Illinois Justice Project, you were a public defender in Chicago for years. Can you tell me some instances that maybe are examples of why this legislation is so important?
Well, you talked about it before in your intro where you talked about people can wait weeks to trial. Actually, it's more like months, sometimes years, sometimes multiple years. So we know that people are stuck in jail, they are innocent. There hasn't been any evidence presented against them. And by being in jail, they are more likely to plead guilty. They're more likely to serve longer sentences than those who have the same background and similar charges who have the opportunity to get out. So, my experience as a Cook County public defender really illustrated that there are really two justice systems. One justice system for folks that are out that actually get the opportunity to participate in their offense, and another justice system which incentivizes people to plead guilty, not because they believe that they've done something wrong, but because they just want to get out of jail, and they are in a worse bargaining position than someone that can actually, use the rights given to them by the Constitution.
Yeah, and you've presented a strong case for why people are very much in favor of this. At the same time, we know that many groups are critical, including the Illinois Law Enforcement Coalition. It's a group of police unions. They've criticized the move to end cash bail, saying that it puts the public at risk. They even wrote that it will, quote, handcuff officers. What's your response to these critiques?
Well, I think the first thing to talk, there are two things to talk about. I think this first, it's important to look at, you know, our past. These are the same groups that said that the streets would run red with blood when we legalized medical marijuana. They said that police dogs would be euthanized if we made adult use cannabis legal. They talked about cartels taking over our cities if we were to make simple reform moves. So I think it's important to think that there's a little bit of a boy that cried wolf scenario going on with many of these groups. I think the second thing it's important to think about is what the bill actually does. You see a lot of fear mongering, and that fear mongering is based upon not actually looking at what the bill does. And we talked about it before. I think many people hear cash bond and they think, oh, everybody will be released. And they're not looking at the 300 pages of statute that reform how that decision making process is going to go. So while I respect our friends in law enforcement, they certainly have a difficult job. I think it's important to look at what this bill actually does and not rely on conceptions based upon who knows what.
And you mentioned and talked about what the bill actually does. The bill itself is called the Pretrial Fairness Act. And in the package, it includes expanding training for officers, making it easier to reprimand officers that commit misconduct. What do you ultimately hope that this will accomplish?
Well, the Pretrial Fairness Act was a part of a larger piece of legislation. And you are right, it talked about policing issues, sentencing issues, custodial conditions. I think the goal here, and I think everybody has the same goal, to make a safer communities with police that are more accountable. So the policing aspects of this bill are really relatively simple asks. Things like you can't, whistleblowers are protected. That officers have a duty or to intervene if they see illegal actions going on. They have a duty to render aid. If they're convicted of certain misdemeanors or felonies, they can't work in the state. I think the asks on the policing side are very simple. Let's have law enforcement, do the right thing. Let's work on the system. Let's work on the systematic processes that can produce better results. Let's not just look at the fact that, oh, there may be bad apples. Let's look at how the system produces the things that we don't like. They are very, very, very moderate asks. And our hope is that this, along with the pretrial sections of the bill, will create a better justice system that will provide more safety and more fairness for all people of our great state.
And the reason we're talking about this is because Illinois is the first state to mandate the end of cash bail. But it's noteworthy that this has been studied before. I know a 2017 study out of New Jersey showed that actually sending fewer people to jail is not only saving taxpayers money, but also creates safer communities, which can be a little counterintuitive. So maybe can you walk us through that? How does that actually work?
Yeah, I think too often people think of jails and prisons as basically the way and the only way we can kind of create safety, and that there are bad people in the world, and if you put them in jail and prisons, they can't do bad things. Actually, what the data and what studies tell us is that when you put somebody in jail, especially in a short-term period, that you're actually increasing the criminogenic factors that exist in their life. For example, I saw at the public defender all the time when somebody would go to jail for a few weeks, they would lose their job if they had a job. They would if they had to pay rent, they would get behind rent. If they had anything going on in terms of education, that would be lost. So you do that short-term jailing, that person comes back out, and they're in a worse place than they were before. Remember, most people, the vast majority of people who touch the criminal justice system will come out. They will have to operate in our society, and too often we put them in worse positions. So the studies are clear. Short-term detention actually makes it more likely that a person will be rearrested. So New Jersey is a great example. They are a state that effectively ended cash bond. There are only a handful of cash bonds passed out through the entire state. And we have other jurisdictions like the federal system and juvenile systems that rarely use money to make these determinations. So while we are the first state to do it completely, this is not an experiment. This is something that's been done before, and we hope to. And we believe that if we implement this thing right, we'll have a lower jail population that will be more effective at making decisions around detention, and will better be in a better position to address any safety concerns.
And while Illinois is not alone in the push for ending cash bail, it's also been clear that other states have tried to make this change but have been unsuccessful. And so, knowing that, why was Illinois able to do this? And what should other states be thinking about to learn from the progress this state has made?
Well, the nationwide movement has been vibrant. I think it's often thought of that it's failed in other states. Most notably, New York tried to do kind of a portion of what we did, and it was curtailed very quickly, not because the data came out that it was a wrong way to go, but because fear mongering, the media got kind of elevated these stories, and people got political cold feet. California was another state that has moved down that path, but put out a statute that was not favored by both law enforcement and justice advocates. So it did not go forward. I believe that Illinois will be a little bit different because we do have a strong advocacy community, but we're also relying on the recommendations of our state Supreme Court. They put out a set of recommendations, about 53, I think, in March of sometime last year, and many of the reforms in the Pretrial Fairness Act are recommendations that were given by our court. So there is, I think, more buy-in. We've given ourselves a long transition period, 2 years, to get things figured out. So I think we're on the right track, and we hope that other states who are moving along this path get here with us.
Well, we'll definitely be watching how the impacts of this legislation unfold. So thank you, Sharon, for giving us the context today.
And thank you so much for having me. You have a great day.
You too, and thank you to everyone for watching. Please be sure to follow all of our Now This pages. I'm Zincle Asamoah.